In the winter of 1864, a farmer's wife in rural Tennessee buried her last 3 jars of preserved food under the floorboards of her kitchen while soldiers moved through the house above her head. She had no husband. She had 4 children under the age of 10. She had no way to buy more food, no neighbors close enough to help, and no certainty that anything would ever return to normal. She survived the next 61 days on almost nothing, not because she was lucky, not because help arrived in time, because she knew things that most Americans today have completely forgotten. Things her grandmother taught her, things passed down through generations of families who understood one simple truth that modern life has buried under convenience and comfort. When the systems fail, and history has proven that they always eventually fail, the only thing standing between your family and a real disaster is knowledge. Not a generator sitting in your garage. Not a 3-day emergency kit from a big box store. Not the 72-hour supply that every government brochure tells you is enough, when every real disaster in the last 30 years lasted longer than that. Knowledge. The kind of knowledge that 30 million American civilians carried in their hands and their heads during the Civil War, when the grocery store did not exist, the power grid had not been imagined, and the difference between a family that made it and a family that did not came down entirely to what they knew how to do. What you are about to hear is not prepper theory. Every single method in this video was used by real American families under conditions far more severe than anything a modern blackout can produce, and every single one of them still works today, in your backyard, with materials you probably already have. Number 7 on this list is the one that surprises people the most, because it turns something most modern families throw in the trash into one of the most powerful preservation tools ever used on American soil. And number 3 will make you look at your backyard fire pit in a completely different way. If you want to make sure you never miss a video like this one, hit that subscribe button right now. Number 25. The fat lamp. On the 4th night of any serious power outage, the flashlight batteries are dead, the candles are gone, and darkness becomes a genuine problem for families who have never had to produce their own light. Civil War households never waited for that moment. Animal fat, collected from cooking and rendered clean over a low heat, was poured into a small dish and fitted with a wick made from twisted cotton cloth. The flame that resulted was steady, warm, and bright enough to work by. A single pound of rendered fat produced enough material for multiple lamps burning several hours each night. In a modern blackout, the fat from your kitchen, the drippings from a roast, the grease collected from a week of cooking bacon is not waste, it is fuel. Your great-great-grandmother did not sit in the dark. She made her own light from what she already had, and so can you. Number 24. The haybox cooker. You bring your pot of food to a full rolling boil, then seal it and wrap it immediately in as many layers of insulation as you can arrange. Heavy wool blankets, hay packed around the sides, old coats stuffed into a wooden box, and leave it completely undisturbed for several hours. The food continues cooking in residual heat without any additional fuel at all. Dried beans that would normally simmer for 3 hours finish completely inside a hay box using only the heat from a single 15-minute boil. In a blackout where you are rationing propane or managing a limited wood supply, a hay box cooker built from a cardboard box and 3 heavy blankets cuts your fuel consumption by more than half for every meal you cook in it. Over 7 days of cooking, it is the difference between running out of fuel on day 4 and having enough to last the entire week. Number 23. Vinegar as a household disinfectant. Civil War field surgeons used vinegar to clean wounds and sanitize surfaces when nothing else was available, and they documented lower rates of infection in patients treated with it. The acetic acid in vinegar kills a broad range of bacteria on contact. A gallon of plain white vinegar, which costs about $3 and keeps indefinitely, serves as a surface disinfectant, a food wash, a wound cleaning agent, and a general sanitizer for dishes and hands. Diluted roughly 50% with clean water, it handles nearly all household sanitation needs. In a 7-day blackout, the ability to keep surfaces clean and wounds from becoming infected is the difference between a manageable situation and a medical crisis. Number 22. The root cellar principle. 3 to 4 feet below the surface of the earth, the temperature stabilizes at somewhere between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of what the weather is doing above. Root vegetables buried in clean sand at that depth keep for months without any energy input. Cured meats stored in that environment remain safe for weeks. During the war, families in contested territory who had root cellars were the ones who survived, Because even when soldiers took everything visible in the house and barn, they rarely found what was buried 3 feet underground. You do not need a full excavated room. A hole 3 feet deep, lined with straw and covered with boards and dirt, costs nothing to build and requires nothing to operate. Your refrigerator becomes a warm box within 12 hours of a blackout. The ground in your backyard works for free, forever. Number 21. Charcoal water filtration. A container with a small hole in the bottom, filled in layers from bottom to top with coarse gravel, then fine sand, then a thick layer of crushed charcoal from a recent fire, is all you need to build the same filtration system that Union Army field manuals described in 1862 and that powers modern water purifiers today. Water poured slowly through those layers comes out significantly clearer and safer than the creek water or rainwater that went in. In a situation where your tap stops flowing and you are collecting water from any available source, this filter removes sediment and many contaminants. Combine it with boiling afterward and nearly any water source becomes safe to drink. How many of these have you already thought about for your own home? Drop your answer in the comments below. Here is something that modern emergency planners consistently get wrong. They tell you to stockpile 72 hours of food and water. 3 days. That is the standard recommendation from every government agency and every emergency brochure tucked into your utility bill. But Hurricane Katrina lasted longer than 3 days. The Texas freeze of 2021 lasted longer than 3 days. The Maui fires displaced families for weeks, not days. 3 days assumes that help is coming quickly. Civil War families knew better. They prepared for the possibility that help was not coming at all. Not as pessimism, as the simple acknowledgement that they were responsible for themselves and for the people in their care. The difference between a 7-day mindset and a 72-hour mindset is not just 4 extra days of supplies. It is an entirely different way of thinking about what you owe your family. Every trick remaining on this list comes from that second mindset. Number 20. Smoking meat over green wood. A simple smoking rack built from fresh-cut green branches, positioned over a slow, smoldering fire of dense hardwood like hickory or oak, preserved an entire animal's worth of meat over 1 to 2 days. The smoke deposited antimicrobial compounds onto the surface of the meat while slowly drawing moisture out, and bacteria need moisture to thrive. A piece of venison properly smoked over green hickory keeps for 2 to 3 weeks at room temperature without refrigeration. In a modern blackout, when the meat in your freezer begins thawing within hours, 4 forked sticks pushed into the ground, 2 green cross branches, and a slow hardwood fire give you a third option beyond cooking everything immediately or watching it go to waste. Number 19. Pine needle tea. When supply lines collapsed and fresh vegetables disappeared, scurvy became a genuine threat to soldiers and civilians alike. What prevented it was a tea made from fresh pine needles that indigenous peoples across North America had used for generations. You gather a small handful of fresh green needles, steep them in hot water for 10 minutes, strain, and drink. The vitamin C content is substantial enough to prevent scurvy entirely when consumed regularly. Civil War field surgeons documented this in medical journals beginning in 1862, specifically because manufactured supplements could not keep pace with the conflict. In a situation where you are cut off from fresh produce for more than a week, there is almost certainly a pine tree within walking distance of your home that can keep your family's nutrition stable for free. Number 18. Ash preservation of root vegetables. Families in the Shenandoah Valley during Sheridan's 1864 campaign developed this technique out of desperation after their barns and crops were systematically burned. Wood ash, dry and cool, packed around root vegetables in a buried crock or covered pit, preserved them for months. The alkaline chemistry of ash absorbed moisture and kept the vegetables in the stable, dry conditions they needed. The fine texture created a physical barrier insects could not penetrate. Potatoes stored in dry wood ash in a covered container have been documented keeping for 3 to 4 months without significant degradation. The ash from your fireplace is not waste, it is infrastructure. Number 17. Dried bean storage. A single pound of dried navy beans contains roughly 1,500 calories and enough protein to sustain a working adult through a full day of physical activity. They require no refrigeration, resist insect damage in sealed containers, and keep for years without any loss of nutritional value. A 20-pound bag from any warehouse store costs less than $15 and contains more than 30,000 calories, enough to feed a family of 4 for more than a week as a primary food source. Soak them overnight and simmer over a fire. No refrigeration needed, no expiration date to worry about for years under proper storage. The families who understood the value of dried beans never faced the panic that most modern households experience within 24 hours of a serious supply disruption. And here is a detail that most people overlook entirely. Beans cooked with a small piece of cured pork fat, which Civil War families always had on hand, become a nutritionally complete meal that provides sustained energy for hours of physical work. The combination of complex carbohydrates from the beans and saturated fat from the pork keeps blood sugar stable far longer than any modern snack food. Soldiers who ate beans and salt pork together for breakfast were documented working and marching through conditions that would exhaust most people today by mid-morning. That is not a coincidence of history. That is nutritional science that worked before anyone had the language to describe it. Number 16. Making soap from ash and fat. By the second year of the Civil War, manufactured soap had become nearly impossible to find in much of the South. Families made their own by leaching water through hardwood ash to create lye, then cooking that lye with rendered animal fat until it saponified into a soft brown soap. The result cleaned skin, clothes, and dishes effectively. In a 7-day blackout, hygiene is not a comfort issue. It is a health issue. Disease spreads when sanitation fails, and in a grid-down scenario with hospitals operating below capacity, a hygiene-related illness is a far more serious problem than under normal conditions. Wood ash from your fireplace and fat from your kitchen are the only raw ingredients you need. Number 15. Corn pone without an oven. Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, and a small amount of fat mixed into a stiff dough, shaped by hand into flat cakes, and cooked on a flat rock near the fire, on the blade of a clean shovel, or directly in hot coals wrapped in damp leaves. No yeast, no rising time, no oven, no electricity. Confederate soldiers on campaign called it journey cake because it could be made wherever the march stopped with whatever was at hand. A single bag of cornmeal from your pantry costs about $3 and can produce dozens of corn pone cakes over a backyard fire and keep your family fed through an extended outage with the most basic cooking setup imaginable. Number 14. Boiling water purification. The widow in the Shenandoah Valley who kept her 4 children alive through a brutal winter boiled every single drop of water her family drank. Not sometimes. Every drop, every time, without exception. A full rolling boil maintained for at least 1 minute kills virtually all waterborne pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and parasites. In a blackout where municipal water fails and you are collecting rainwater or drawing from a stream, this single practice prevents more illness than any other action you can take. It requires nothing but a pot and a heat source. It costs nothing. The families who applied this consistently had a survival advantage that no amount of food stockpiling or equipment purchasing could replace. Number 13. Pemmican as long-term survival food. Lean meat dried completely, pounded into a coarse powder, and mixed with rendered fat in roughly equal parts by weight, then pressed into dense cakes. A single pound of finished pemmican contains roughly 3,500 calories, more than a full day's nutrition for an active adult, in a compact form that fits in a coat pocket and requires no cooking, no preparation, and no refrigeration. Stored in a cool, dry environment, it keeps for months. Made from beef jerky and melted tallow from your grocery store, it is an emergency food reserve that no freeze-dried product can match for cost, caloric density, and shelf stability. Number 12. Herbal wound care. The Surgeon General's office published field guides on medicinal plants during the war, specifically because manufactured supplies could not keep up with demand. Broadleaf plantain, the flat-leaved weed that grows in nearly every American yard, was applied as a fresh poultice to minor cuts and infected wounds, and documented as reducing inflammation reliably. Yarrow was applied directly to bleeding wounds because it contains compounds that promote clotting and slow blood loss. Willow bark, steeped into a tea or chewed, contains salicin, the natural precursor to aspirin, and was used for fever and pain throughout the war. In a blackout where pharmacies may be closed and your medicine cabinet is finite, knowing that the weeds in your backyard have documented, medically verified properties is not folk belief. It is military medical history. Are you already thinking about which of these you want to try first? Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Here's what nobody selling survival gear wants you to understand. The most effective tools for keeping your family safe in an extended emergency are not products, they are skills. A $300 water filter does exactly what a bucket of sand and charcoal does. A $50 emergency candle does what a dish of rendered fat and a cotton wick does for almost nothing. A $200 dehydrator does what salt and smoke do for free. The Civil War generation survived 4 years of catastrophic infrastructure collapse without a single product designed specifically for survival, because every product they owned served multiple survival purposes simultaneously. Their flour was emergency food. Their fat was lamp fuel and waterproofing and skincare. Their ash was soap and food preservation medium and fire management tool. Their knowledge was the technology. Everything you need already exists in your home right now. The question is only whether you know what to do with it. Number 11. The Dakota Fire Hole. You dig 2 holes in the ground roughly 18 inches apart, each about 12 inches across and 12 inches deep. Then connect them with a tunnel at an angle so that the tunnel feeds air from the surface down into the base of the fire pit. The fire burns below ground level, fed by a constant supply of oxygen flowing through the underground tunnel. The result burns hotter and more efficiently than any open surface fire, produces dramatically less smoke, is invisible from a distance, and resists both rain and wind. In a blackout where you need to cook outdoors and conserve fuel, the Dakota Fire Hole uses roughly half the wood of an open fire to produce the same cooking heat and boils water faster because the flame is concentrated directly beneath the pot. Number 10. Salt curing of meat. A heavy application of coarse salt to raw meat, roughly 1 pound of salt for every 5 pounds of meat, draws the moisture out and creates a surface environment so hostile to bacterial growth the decomposition essentially stops. You pack the meat in a barrel or deep crock, cover every surface thoroughly with coarse salt, weigh it down with a clean stone, and leave it for a week. What you retrieve is salt-cured meat that keeps for months at room temperature without refrigeration. In a blackout, the meat in your freezer begins thawing within hours. A 4-pound box of kosher salt, which costs about $3, can preserve 20 pounds of meat for months. That is the difference between losing everything in your freezer and having a protein supply that outlasts the crisis. There is one detail that Civil War families understood that most modern accounts of this technique leave out. The liquid that accumulates in the crock as the salt draws moisture from the meat, called brine, is not waste to be discarded. It is a preservation medium that can be used to cure additional smaller cuts, to pickle vegetables, or to add salt and flavor to soups and stews throughout the weeks that follow. Nothing in a properly run Civil War household was used once and thrown away. Every byproduct had a second purpose. That discipline of extracting maximum value from every resource is as important a survival skill as any specific technique on this list. Number 9. Banking coals for overnight fire. At the end of the evening, you rake the surviving hardwood coals into the center of the fire pit, cover them completely with a thick layer of the ash that is accumulated from the fire itself, and leave them undisturbed until morning. The ash acts as an insulating blanket that reduces oxygen without extinguishing the coals entirely, allowing them to smolder through the night without consuming significant fuel. In the morning, you rake the ash aside and find the coals still alive and ready to build back to a full fire within minutes. In a 7-day blackout where matches and lighters are a finite resource, a banked fire means you light it once on day 1 and maintain it through day 7. The ash produced by the fire itself becomes the tool that preserves it. Number 8. Clay pot evaporative cooling. An unglazed clay pot that has never been sealed with any waterproofing, kept in a shaded location with a damp cloth over the top, maintains the water stored inside it at a temperature significantly below the surrounding air because water seeps slowly through the walls and evaporates on the outer surface, drawing heat outward. The same principle is why sweating cools your body. In a summer blackout, heat-related illness becomes a genuine medical risk for children and the elderly within a few days of sustained heat without adequate hydration and cooling. An unglazed terracotta pot from any garden center, a damp cloth, and a shaded location creates a passive cooling system that works continuously with absolutely no electricity. Number 7. Hardtack as permanent bread. Properly made hardtack sealed in a dry container has been documented lasting for years without any refrigeration, any preservatives, or any special storage conditions beyond being kept dry. 3 ingredients: all-purpose flour, water, and a small amount of salt. You mix them into an extremely stiff dough, roll it thin, cut it into squares, prick each square thoroughly with a fork, and bake it low and slow until every trace of moisture is gone. The result carries roughly 75 calories per piece and can be eaten dry, soaked in water or coffee to soften it, or crumbled into soup. A 50-pound sack of flour can produce enough hardtack to keep a family of 4 supplied for weeks. It costs about $25. Modern survivalists spend $40 on a single pouch of freeze-dried food that does exactly what a cup of flour and 20 minutes of baking does for almost nothing. Number 6. Lard as a multi-purpose resource. Civil War families kept it in 5-pound crocks and reached for it constantly because they understood it was not just a cooking fat. When light was needed and candle materials were unavailable, lard in a shallow dish with a cotton wick burned steadily for hours. When leather boots needed waterproofing, a heavy application of lard provided the same protection as any commercial treatment. When skin cracked from cold weather, a thin coat of lard applied before sleep healed it overnight. When mechanisms stuck, lard served as lubricant. A 5-pound bucket costs about $8 and serves as cooking fat, lamp fuel, skin protectant, waterproofing agent, and mechanical lubricant simultaneously. Civil War families kept crocks of it the way modern families keep junk drawers, always reaching for it, always finding it useful for something they had not anticipated. Number 5. Insulation for cold weather survival. The same box packed with hay, straw, or wool that kept food cooking in residual heat also kept people warm when fires could not be maintained through the night. Blankets layered inside enclosed spaces, heavy coats packed against walls, hay stuffed around sleeping areas created a microenvironment that body heat alone could maintain at a survivable temperature, even when the surrounding space was extremely cold. In a winter blackout where your central heating fails and temperatures inside your home begin dropping toward dangerous levels, the insulation principle saves lives with whatever material you have available. The physics have not changed since 1863. Number 4. Rendering fat and making tallow candles. Suet, the hard fat found around the kidneys of cattle or pigs, which most butchers today will provide for free, is melted slowly, strained clean through a cloth, and fitted with a cotton wick dipped repeatedly until the candle builds up layer by layer to its final size. A single pound of suet produces enough tallow for 4 to 6 candles that each burn for several hours. The smell of burning tallow is not pleasant to modern noses. It is heavy and meaty, but the light is steady and reliable, and 1 cow's worth of kidney suet produces enough tallow for a month of evening candlelight. Your great-great-grandmother did not sit in the dark when the power failed. She made her own light, and she could teach you to do the same in an afternoon. Number 3. Cooking directly in ash and coals. When Civil War families lost their cooking equipment entirely, there was still a way to cook that required nothing but a fire, cornmeal, water, and a leaf. Cornmeal dough mixed stiff with a small amount of water and salt, wrapped in damp leaves, and buried directly in the hot coals and ash of a dying fire. The leaf protected the dough from direct contact with the ash while allowing heat to penetrate evenly, and the result after 30 to 40 minutes was a dense, firm cake that satisfied hunger completely with zero equipment beyond your hands, a fire, and a leaf. No pot, no pan, no utensils of any kind. In any backyard fire pit in America today, this works exactly as it worked in 1863. If you have cornmeal, you have bread. If you have bread, you have a meal. Number 2. Community coordination and neighbor networks. Isolated families failed. Connected communities survived. This pattern repeated so consistently across 4 years and across every region of the country that it cannot be explained as coincidence. Families who had developed simple communication systems with their neighbors, who had made basic agreements about sharing resources and warning each other of danger, who had established the habit of regular contact before the crisis arrived, consistently came through conditions that overwhelmed isolated households with more supplies and more individual capability. A lantern in a specific window meant safety. A cloth hung from a fence post meant need. In a modern blackout, your cell phone fails within a day, and your internet is gone from the first moment. The families who manage an extended outage best are not necessarily the ones with the most supplies. They are the ones who already know their neighbors and have simple, pre-arranged systems in place that do not depend on any powered infrastructure at all. Think about that honestly for a moment. Do you know your neighbors well enough to ask them for help in a real crisis? Do they know you well enough to come to your door if they needed something and had no other option? The Civil War record shows that the answer to those 2 questions predicted survival outcomes more reliably than the size of anyone's food supply. Community is not a soft, optional extra layered on top of physical preparedness. It is the foundation that physical preparedness rests on. The families who understood that in 1863 were the ones whose descendants are alive today to tell their stories. Number 1. The discipline of rationing. Every technique on this list is useless without the single skill that held Civil War families together through years of genuine deprivation: rationing. Civil War mothers and fathers inventoried their supplies on the first day of any serious disruption. They counted everything. They divided the total by the number of days they needed to cover. They established a daily ration for each person based on what was available and enforced those rations with consistency that did not waver when children complained or when stress made people want to eat everything immediately for the comfort of a full stomach. They knew that a 7-day crisis eaten as a 2-day feast becomes a 5-day famine. They knew that the family which inventoried carefully and rationed consistently would still have food on day 7. The family which did not would be desperate by day 3. This discipline runs directly against how human psychology responds to stress and scarcity. It is a skill that has to be deliberately developed and committed to before the moment of crisis arrives, because that moment is the worst possible time to try to build it from scratch. That is the foundation. That is number 1. That is the skill that every other skill on this list depends on. Here is my challenge to you. Pick 3 techniques from this list and practice them before you need them. Build a Dakota fire hole this weekend. Make a batch of hardtack and store it in your pantry. Set up a charcoal water filter from a 5-gallon bucket and test it. Because the Civil War generation did not read about survival. They practiced it until it was instinct, until their hands knew what to do without their minds having to think about it, until the techniques were automatic and available in the dark, under stress, with their families depending on them. The gap between reading about a skill and being able to execute it under pressure is the only gap that matters when things go wrong. Close that gap now. Drop in the comments which technique you are going to try first. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because this is exactly the kind of content we produce every week.